Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to our favorite albums and songs of the year series. Um, Back by no demand at all. We're doing it because we think it's fun. That's you can go fuck yourselves. Anyway, um, I always do these intros on the fly, so some of them are better than others. So yeah, I'm Tom. If you're new, I'm joined as always by my wonderful co-hosts Vanessa and Chris to once again break down another year. It feels like we've been doing this for half a decade. We've actually only done like 11 years of time in the series, so we've got quite a lot to get through. We're kind of coming out of what a lot of people consider to be like a great golden age of music between sort of 1967 and 1973. We're kind of past that. 74, 75 really good too. And I don't know about you guys, but I think 76 is kind of a weird middle year between the sort of the last hurrah of classic rock in 75 and the advent of sort of new wave punk, that kind of stuff in 77. It feels like there's sort of traces of the stuff that's to come and traces of the stuff that has been, and because of that it feels very, very different. So Chris, how are you feeling about 1976?
Um, yeah, overall, I kind of agree. It does feel kind of transitionary, I guess. You know, I, I I took a quick look at like the charts just to see if I was missing any like obvious songs I wanted to include because I did miss a couple from 1975 that I feel bad about, but that's all past us now. I can't go back. But regardless, like disco was pretty hot at this time. It had really taken over the mainstream, and um, what's definitely better regarded now is it feels like the top is pretty top. There's a lot of I think there's a good like top 10 here, and maybe there's some deeper for some other people, but I listened to a few more, and I was getting into some threes territory, sixes, excuse me. I don't know. I think the top are great, but I was even for this kind of quicker experiment, kind of burnt out on the depth. So yeah, I think it was kind of a disco year, and that's fine. That's fine. It is what it is. I think I think in 77 and 78, 79, I'm looking forward to, yeah, the punk, whatever, the power pop. It's gonna come. I'm excited, but this year is special for what it has, and um yeah, it's hard to rate it. I'll think about that later.
Yeah, I was the same as you actually. I think in terms of my new listens for this, there were a couple that really stood out, sort of more so than previous years. But I also had a few that I was like, wow, I could have just not listened to this and my life would be exactly the same. Um, so yeah, Vanessa, how are you feeling about 1976?
Pretty similarly, although I don't know that I have a pretty strong, I'd say top 20. Like I have a lot of eights, really strong eights that just miss the top 10 that are like about the same like level, high eights. And I think it's a really good year for hard rock. Like there was a lot of really strong hard rock albums. So if you're into that, like it's a good year. Um Overall, but not like a stellar necessarily year for that, but like a solid year, I would say. Um But yeah, I mean, disco, I mean, I wasn't really looking at much because I guess that's more of a songs genre really overall, I'd say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It was a weird. I actually didn't really have a solid vibe going in. Like I usually have an idea and sometimes it shifts and sometimes things fall off or new things come in that I didn't expect. But there's usually like a foundation, but the foundation going in was very very weak. But I did find some new surprises, so that was cool. It was just a different experience than the previous really bunch of years for a long time. Like 66 was kind of similar when the top was really strong and then it kind of fell off, but I'd say it fell off more because it wasn't really the era of the album totally yet, but yeah, kind of a similar idea, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting year to get into because, like I said, like I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm kind of ready for 77 in the sense that it is bringing a whole new wave of types of music. Like the types of music we were listening to is quite limited at this time. Obviously, like we enjoy that type of music, it's great, but when that's all you're listening to for a project, it can get a bit like, okay, I could do with a little bit of variety here. So I think that's definitely going to be welcomed come 1977, and then into the 80s even more so, right? There's going to be so much more different stuff going on.
Yeah.
So am I right in saying it's Vanessa going first?
I believe so. I think that's what
There
we
we
need
go.
to do.
Take it
So,
away.
all right. Well, starting with number 10, and not a band I ever thought I would see in a top 10 because I didn't fully appreciate them before, but Aerosmith with Rocks, an album I really got into, which surprised me a little bit. Not because I thought their last albums were weak or anything. I did enjoy them, but this one was just a little, I just liked it just a little bit more. 9, I have Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy. There's a bit of a theme in these honorable mentions aside from one. The outlier is Desire by Bob Dylan. For number 8. Number 7 is Technical Ecstasy by Black Sabbath, which is overhated, definitely. And number 6 is Rising by Rainbow, or Rainbow Rising, whatever you prefer to call it. So into the top 5, we're starting with the self-titled album by Warren Zevon. So I'm definitely a sucker for the Los Angeles singer-songwriter scene of the 70s, as I'm sure people have noticed. And this album is a veritable who's who of that crew. But there's something more that sets it apart that makes it a little bit special. Warren Zevon was a unique songwriter whose artistic voice shines through through these arrangements and these songs. So many of these songs will be covered by others, and with good reason, because they are great songs, but there's something special about hearing Warren's versions of them. And this album ends on a major high note with the classic Desperados Under the Eaves, which even stands out among all these other great songs for me. Number 4 was a new listen, which is not something that happens very often in my top 5, and I have 2 of them this year, which was crazy. So number 4 is Summertime Dream by Gordon Lightfoot, which never would have expected. Growing up in Canada, Gordon Lightfoot has always been a fairly omnipresent artist, and I think that caused me to never really look further into him, since I kind of took him for granted. I mean, I always heard his songs, I always heard about how he's a great songwriter, blah, 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 blah. His classics were always everywhere, but I just never listened to any of his albums. As I've started checking out more of his albums, I've been seeing just how wrong I've been in skipping over him. I've absolutely fallen in love with this album. And sure, it has the Wreck of Edmund Fitzgerald, which everybody points to as like the signature song on this album, but there is so much more on this album than just that song. It is, of course, a classic, but I'd argue that all these other songs are great too. There's a great variety stylistically to the songs here, from the breeziness of the title track to the beautiful darkness of Protocol and the heartfelt I'm Not Supposed to Care. There's a lot more here to latch onto. And not only are the songs great, but I think the arrangements are too. And I think that it's a very well produced album. It sounds fantastic. This album was just a lovely surprise in a year of surprises. Number 3 is another new entry, and that is A New World Record by Electric Light Orchestra. I didn't necessarily expect this album to have the impact on me that it did, because up to this point, I've enjoyed the other ELO albums that I've heard, but they usually fall around the 8 range for me. But this album, for whatever reason, was a whole different experience. I can only describe it as euphoric, and it was like an instant connection. I was listening to it and I was like, whoa, I finally get it. I finally totally get ELO, I think. I love the arrangements and the melodies on this album, and it's also really caused me to fully connect with Jeff Lynne's voice. The magic that I've always felt hearing Strange Magic, I feel with most of this album, and it has been a real aha moment for them. And I find myself falling in love with different songs on this album every time I hear it. So The new ones that have made my top 5, I've listened to several times just to confirm, because usually my top 5 are albums I've already known. Number 2, probably won't be a surprise. It's Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. This is a long album, a bit of a journey, but all but all great and solid, with a fantastic flow from the recognizable hits to the deep cuts. As I alluded to in the past, Stevie sounds at home with the 70s, but also timeless and inspirational towards the future of soul and R&B for years to come. Lots of touches from other genres throughout this album, like the cool rock inspired guitar on All Day Sucker and the jazz fusion of Contusion. Stevie in this era couldn't help but win. And it would be tempting to call this his magnum opus, but at the same time, that glosses over the fact that he had a string of amazing albums over the course of a short amount of years. I guess it would make more sense to call this the climax of that era, which is not to say he wouldn't release more great music, but this kind of feels like what everything else was leading up to. And number 1 is, of course, Station to Station by David Bowie. Often calling an album a transition album can be seen as not necessarily a negative thing, but maybe an indication that something is a little messy between periods of greatness. But that is not the case here. I see this as a transition album that is as great or greater than the albums it bridges. And it creates a seamless transition from the brighter soul influences of Young Americans to the sparser and darker Berlin trilogy. But it has its own kind of greatness too, like it's got its own vibe. And every time I listen to it, it takes me to another world. It's a rather immersive experience. And it's also one of the first Bowie albums that I really got into, which makes it a little bit special. And it's definitely one that I would consider a grower, but it only gets more rewarding as time goes on.
Very nice. Very nice. It's me now, isn't it? Usually I'm more on top of this, but
Yeah.
I think it's me. Okay. So definitely share quite a few actually. But you know, that's how it goes. Good music is good music. And a lot of the time we agree on it. Sometimes we don't though. And there's going to be one album not on my list that people are going to be very annoyed at me at. And I'm not even going to say the name because you're going to know what it is. My number 10 is A Trick of the Tail by Genesis. Beginning of the Phil Collins era. He's still kind of sort of filling in for Peter Gabriel rather than being himself. But the arrangements here are amazing. Steve Hackett and Tony Banks, as always, their interplay is just incredible to hear. And the last 3 songs are actually my favorite 3 on the album, which is quite unusual that it ends so strong. Number 9, Desire by Bob Dylan. You know, I probably used to like it more than I do now. It's probably fallen a little bit in my Dylan ranking. Still think it's great. Love the sound. Emmylou Harris and Scarlett Rivera pretty much make it. Yeah, really good album. I don't really feel as passionately about some of these as on previous lists, but they are very good albums for sure. We're getting better at number 8 with Jailbreak by Thin Lizzy, which re-listening to this one, I really, really, really liked it this time around. I liked it before, but it's really consistent. There's barely a weak moment on it. We obviously like the title track and Boys Are Back in Town are the obvious ones, but you know, songs like Romeo and the Lonely Girl as well, like really, really good. Just great start to finish rock album. Number 7 is A New World Record by Electric Light Orchestra. That's another one we have in common. Yeah, this has always been my favorite ELO album. ELO are probably, well, one of my dad's favorite bands, maybe his favorite band. So I was very much aware of them, and they're not my favorite kind of music. I'm not always in the mood for that sort of glimmery Jeff Lynne production, but this one has always been one I've come back to. I think it's mainly because you get the most amount of like beautiful ballads, which I think is what Jeff Lynne really excels at. Between Telephone Line and Mission, those 2 songs are just unreal. But then you also get really great pop like Tightrope and Living Thing. I think the only thing that drags the album down is there's a couple songs where Jeff Lynne is trying to be like a cool blues rocker, and it's like doesn't work quite as well for me as the sort of the more sort of over the top like cinematic style songs. But you know, overall really good album. And yeah, number 7. And my number 6 is Summertime Dream by Gordon Lightfoot, which I also discovered for the first time this time around. And I had listened to quite a lot of his for this series. I think Lightfoot made my honorable mentions in '66, and he's back 10 years later. I agree with pretty much everything he said. Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald is great, but it's probably only like my 4th or 5th favorite song on the album. I think there's just loads of really great songwriting here. It kind of reminds me a lot of like the Simon and Garfunkel type of songwriting, where it's like quite poppy folk, but also very sort of meaningful lyricism, and it never sort of becomes too sort of soft. It's always got an element of emotion going through it, which I really appreciate. So my number 5, this one has not been mentioned yet. The Royal Scam by Steely Dan. My second favorite Steely Dan album. And I think this is the first one that's made my top 5, because for a while there, I thought they were going to be the Byrds of the '70s, where they were just going to be just outside every year, but they've snuck in '76 because it's 1976. But the Royal Scam is great. Royal Scam is great. I think the side one of this album is probably the best side of music they ever put out. So consistent. Each track is as good as the last. Especially like the Fez, which is this really cool, funky track. And then like so much has already been said about Kid Charlemagne that I probably shouldn't even bother. And then side 2 is really good too. I really like Haitian Divorce. I think that's the standout there. I think that's got some really funny sort of cheeky lyrics. There's more sort of R&B influence here than they ever had before or after this album, which is really cool. And it has this like smooth production, but it's also got a bit of grit, which would kind of be gone by the next album. So it's kind of like the perfect middle ground for me between the stuff I really liked and the stuff later on, which I'm not as big on. Great instrumentation, great songs, great album. Steely Dan, number 5. Okay, then. So I'm gonna have to put my my hipster art student hat on for this one. My number 4 is Popol Vuh with Letzte Tage, Letzte Nachte. Murdoch, if you're listening, I hope my German pronunciation was okay. I did try and research that. This is a krautrock album, which is not usually a genre that I'm super into, but Popol Vuh kind of, they are really accessible within that genre, I think, because they have so much going on within their sound. Yes, the music is very atmospheric and drony, but there is a real human element thanks to the beautiful female vocals. There's a sort of classical influence, giving it this sort of like grand feel. And the guitar work throughout is really cool. It almost veers into sort of jangly at times as the sort of like 3 or 4 different guitar tracks are overlapping. It's got this really awesome sort of nature walk vibe, which I think I've definitely taken advantage of. Listened to it on a few walks. Obviously, it was a new listen this time, which I was not expecting to make my top 5, but I'm glad it did. At just 30 minutes, it's pretty easy to recommend. And probably a good gateway album for people who are not too into this sort of more atmospheric type of music, because there is quite a lot of melody on a few of the songs, and even the ones that are a bit more drony, it's got a bit more sort of traditional instrumentation and sort of folky influence, which really does work. So Popol Vuh with Letzte Tage, Letzte Nachte, number 4. Number 3 is another one that's already been mentioned. I got my hipster pick out of the way now. I'm going to be quite boring. Rainbow Rising, not only maybe the coolest album cover ever, but just one of the coolest albums ever. Like hard rock at its most blistering and intense, whilst also being pretty accessible and very anthemic. Stargazer is the obvious standout, but I also love Tara Woman and Starstruck as well. Do You Close Your Eyes is the only song I could do without, really, but even that's not bad at all. You know, it's just, you know, a bit forgettable and lyrics are a bit silly, but it's really tight and concise and just a really epic package. And, you know, it's essential listening for anyone who's a hard rock fan, but if you are a hard rock fan, you've already heard it. So, and then my number 2 is another one that's not been mentioned. It's 2112 by Rush. I love this album. I'm quite a big Rush fan. I don't know. They're one of those artists where I have a lot of sort of 8s and 9s, but no sort of perfect masterpiece. Who knows? Could change when I re-listen to some of them, but I think they'll be sort of mentioned a lot from me, and this will probably be the highest placement they get on the list. yeah, 2112 is one of my absolute favorites from them, probably top 3. I think the title track is one of my favorite prog epics, and then you get some really underrated songs on side 2, like Tears and Lessons, which are 2 of my favorite 70s Rush songs. Sort of a bit of folky hard rock, sort of like Zeppelin style. I know, like obviously early Rush is going to be compared to Zeppelin a lot because there were big influences on them, but it definitely is there. And yeah, I think I don't really have much else to say. It's just a brilliant prog album, really sort of spacey and conceptual and cool and melodic, and it's my number 2 album of 1976. But of course, we all know what number 1's going to be. Station to Station by David Bowie as well. Though I do love Rainbow Rising and 2112, this was never in doubt. Probably the easiest number 1 to pick so far in this series. My favorite album ever, from maybe my favorite artist. It's not my favorite album ever. It's up there, but it's my favorite album from my favorite artist, if that makes sense. The Red Pepper and Cocaine fueled epic through the mind of a troubled man, supported by an absolutely shit hot band, including Roy Bittan from the E Street Band. Shout out Roy Bittan on keys. This is his second straight album of the year. Hell yeah. It's right up there with my very favorites of all time and may just be my favorite of the decade, but we'll have to see about that. It's sort of like my Bowie album. When I first went through the discography, this one just absolutely rocked my world. His writing is at an all-time high. I don't think any of the tracks are weak at all. Like, they're all fantastic. I mean, that helps when we only got 6 tracks, but like they're quite long and none of them really outstay their welcome either. They all sort of just last exactly as long as you'd want them to. I do sort of gravitate slightly towards side 1 more than side 2 in general, but all the songs are super enjoyable, groovy, catchy, and enigmatic. And Bowie's persona here is one of his most intriguing that he ever sort of went into. You get slices of funk with Golden Years and Stay, and then you get the epic title track to open the album. And then you have a song like Word on a Wing, which is like among the most introspective songs of his entire career. It all just absolutely rips, and hearing one song from it makes me want to hear the whole album every time. So Station to Station, easy winner, 1976.
Yep, saw that coming. Well, I think we share a few. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what we share. Lost track. So enraptured with your words. Couple of honorable mentions, and maybe some bigger records are missing here than you want, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I don't mention it. Anyway, honorable mentions. Number 10, I'm going 2112 by Rush. In my youth, I was quite a big Rush fan, at least the bigger records, which I consider this one of. And I think I've cooled quite a bit. I still have a lot of respect for them. This one for me is really driven by the title track, and then I just can't really get into the rest. But regardless, 2112, number 10. Number 9, I'm going Dreamboat Annie by Heart. I'm counting it for this year, okay? I know it was released first in 1970, but don't talk to me about that. Nobody had it in 1975, all right? When my wife and I married our fortunes together, we actually owned and still own 3 copies of this. I don't know who had 2 copies, but now we have 3, and it's, I guess in case we lose 2 of them. Anyway, the Wilson sisters, mad talented. They're just showing off here. It's great. Very special record to me. Number 8, Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak. Yeah, these songs, they just kind of creep on you. You know, they're not like obvious bangers. There were several times when I was listening to this, and I'm like, I'm not so sure about this song, and then it just breaks out, and you're like, okay, all right. Yeah, Romeo and whatever, and the Cowboy song were especially fun discoveries for me. So number 7, I'm going Boston, Self-Titled. I've always liked this record. I know they're played out and classic rock radio has worn them out, but I like most of these songs. I'm kind of ashamed that their career fell apart with every record after this, but these songs I still love. So Sorry for the Discord notification. Who's pinging me? And number 6, just missing the cut. I'm so sorry to do it. It's Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny. Uh-oh. Here comes Judas Priest. Yep, they're coming. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. Number 5. Number 5 will be Station to Station by David Bowie. Yes, it does make the cut. Thanks for asking. This record, yeah, it's always, I don't know, it when I think about it outside of the context of this year and just as a greater Bowie list, it's I'm sorry, Tom, it's always kind of easy for me to not think of as one of the greats. And listen, I think it's a grower. I've spent more time with it. Despite the fact it's just 6 songs, how could it be a grower? I mean, you can listen to it. It's kind of a breeze. Well, no, it's not a breeze. The first song is 10 minutes. It's not a breeze, but I think all the songs here are great, actually. And hearing it this time for this, I was like, yeah, okay, this is great. All the songs are great. It must be great. We'll see how I feel. You know how I felt about Young Americans, and you know how, well, you don't know how I'm going to feel about the Berlin trilogy. You will soon enough. But I think this is a great record. That should be less of a surprise to everyone else than it was to me. But anyway, that's number 5. Station to Station. Number 4, I'm going with Warren Zevon, Self-Titled. Whoa, this was a new discovery for me. I had never heard this, and I've listened to it a couple times. Holy cow. Just got transported into these songs. Just really love his voice, and the songs are like pretty depressing, so that's generally speaking a bonus. Each song just unfolds and flows. I don't know what else to say than I just really appreciate his songwriting. So many songs just captured me, and I just think they sound very cool. So anyway, very cool discovery for me, and you could say I'm an excitable boy to explore more. So all right, thanks. Bronze Medal, number 3. It's another self-titled that hasn't been mentioned. Uh-oh, you guys hate it. It's the Modern Lovers. It's Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. He gets bronze this year. This record is really cool. So Jonathan Richman, I first discovered him from this like classic alternative Spotify playlist thing that actually introduced me to some cool stuff back when I was less cool than I am now, obviously. When I was less versed to music. But there was a song on there. It was his solo record from I think 1992, and it was like dancing in a lesbian bar. Well, and it also had Roadrunner from this record. So I knew like those 2 songs, and I was kind of familiar with his voice. And, I liked him, but for some reason I never thought to explore it more. Then I heard the song I'm Straight, which like is great, but hard to sing kind of now in context. He's talking about being straight, like straight edge, not sexuality, but it's hard for me to like sing along to that, right? So anyway, I'm getting way off topic. This record does have Roadrunner, which is a great song, and it would be easy to think that that's like carrying the rest of the weight, but the Velvet Underground sensibilities on this thing are like very clear, and it makes sense when you learn that this was actually recorded in like 1971, 72. I don't know why it wasn't released then. Someone in the comments maybe can explain to me if they know. I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to compete with the best records of all time, perhaps, and so they released it in a weaker year like 1976. It's a good enough reason for me. Awesome proto-punk, garage rock, whatever you want to call it. It rocks plenty, and the bonus tracks are great too. If you find that version, it's probably on Spotify. But really cool. Really like Jonathan Richman's songwriting. Yeah, just a fun record. So Modern Lovers, very cool. Silver Medal has been mentioned. This is Electric Light Orchestra, A New World Record. I did not expect ELO to be winning this hard. in the 70s, but hey, here we are. This record is awesome. I love all of the songs, and as grand and symphonic as some of them are, it's never like, oh, it's just right. Jeff Lynne has this touch. It's never too ostentatious. It's not like Queen. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's balanced. All right. They know when to explode and when to cool it down. And you come for the hits, but you stay for everything else. And some of my favorites on this record, well, I do love Living Thing, but but some of my favorites aren't the hits. So I think this record is just great through and through. It's a New World record. That's number 2. And my winner is, of course, Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. This could be anyone else's greatest hits record. And you would be like, holy cow, they must have had an insanely good career to be able to compile a double record full of songs like this. And I am occasionally wary. I think it's wary. Weary is like I'm tired, right? Wary is okay. Regardless, I'm a little dubious on my thoughts about double albums sometimes, but Stevie probably should not be doubted most of the time. Just put your trust in Stevie. He'll deliver. All of the performances on this thing are stellar, beyond stellar. I mean, they're flawless. The production is just precise, has these touches that are just immaculate. You listen again with like nice headphones and you're like, holy cow. Just listen to what's going on. And the sounds on some of these are like as alien as they are, as the songs are familiar now. It's really a treat to just listen and try to experience it as though you haven't heard Sir Duke 100 times. Yeah, it's just it's quite an experience. And oh, what? It's too long. You're too old. Get over it. Just make some coffee and enjoy it. You know, speaking of being too old, they don't make them like this anymore. They really don't. But seriously, this is one of my all-time favorite records. I think it definitely justifies the length, and yeah, I could not pick a better record for 1976 than Songs in the Key of Life. There you have it. That's my list.
Very nice. I think we're all on the same page in that despite it being a weaker year, like the number 1, number 2, that's sort of still very strong. It's just sort of like it just tails off a little bit as you go down the list. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry I told you to go F yourselves at the start. I didn't mean that. I'm glad that you stayed the whole time. Please let us know what your favorite albums of 1976 are. Do you think that I really like Popol Vuh, or do you think I'm just saying it to sound cool? Let me know. And, you know, if there are albums that any of us mentioned that you have not heard, check them out and let us know what you thought of them. We'll be back with songs this time next week, hopefully. Until then, hopefully, we'll catch you soon.